Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook Live program, Social, broadcasting once a month to discuss social psychology research and applications to your life. My name is T. And I'll be your host today. Actually, today is very special as it is the first time we broadcast in English to hopefully reach audiences who uses English and both in Thai and everywhere else in the world. For today, we have Dr. Adi Shaket, a lecturer in social psychology at Psychology Faculty Jula. As our guest speaker, Ajahn Adi is doing research in the area of emotions and relationships. So the topic today is emotions, what they are, why do we have them, and what should we do about them? So please welcome Ajahn Adi. สวัสดีค่ะ
Sawadee Krap. So, hello,
Hello, good afternoon.
uh, go ahead.
Please, please, can you tell us about a little bit for the big picture of what are emotions?
Sure. So, just for starters, introduce myself a little bit first. My name is Dr. Dishaked. I'm a social psychologist. I'm also an emotion researcher. So, I'm interested in a variety of topics, including emotions, conversations, relationships, and other things that kind of bring us closer to each other. So, we're going to be talking about a topic with which you're all very familiar, right? Emotion. But we're going to do it in a slightly more scientific way than what you're probably used to. And so a part of that, in order to speak about something more precisely, we need to understand what it is. So we're going to try to define emotion. So one of the funny things about emotions is that they're surprisingly hard to define. It's kind of like trying to define something like rock music. So if you ask anyone, they can list you a variety of emotions, right? Happiness, sadness, embarrassment, shame, anger. And we all know when we're experiencing emotions. But if we go just a step further and try to think about what emotions have in common, why is sadness like happiness and why are they like embarrassment? Even experts don't entirely agree. So let's try to define emotion right now. And we're going to start with the most obvious part. So emotions are different from other things that our minds do, like when we believe things or when we're thinking, because we feel them inside our bodies. Emotions are also the way that we respond to situations. So we feel different things in different situations. So for example, we feel sad after loss. We feel angry when life is being unfair. We feel afraid when we're in danger. And it's not so much about what's happening, but our understanding of what is happening. So I'll give you some examples, right? Imagine a friend is ghosting us, right? And when you ghost someone, it means that you're ignoring the person, right? You're not answering their phone calls. You're not answering their text messages. You just disappear. And when this happens, right, we would presumably feel upset because we're losing a part of our social environment, right? We're losing a friend. But you can also imagine another situation where your friend decides to hang out in a cafe and then gives you exactly the same message, right? I don't think we should be hanging out anymore. I don't think we've been getting along well, and let's just not really talk anymore. So at kind of a superficial kind of surface level, these two situations are very different from each other. In one case, we're having this conversation with a friend, but in the other case, the friend just already disappeared. But from another standpoint, these things are meaningfully similar. Were you about to say something?
No, I'm trying to listening.
Okay.
Okay.
So the situations are also similar in this kind of meaningful way, right? They're both situations where we experience a loss. Our social circle is shrinking. We are losing a friend. And we would really want to respond to both in a similar way. We want to reconnect with people. We want to make new friends or strengthen old relationships with friends or with family. And because the situations are similar in how we understand them, we feel the same emotion. We feel upset, we feel sad, and therefore we want to respond in similar ways. So our emotions are our understanding of what is happening. And we've talked about two things so far, right, that define emotion: our feelings and the fact that they occur in response to how we understand situations. But there are other things that happen too. We smile, we frown, we walk proudly. All of these things are visible behaviors that accompany emotion. And there's also other things that kind of hide underneath the surface. Our heartbeat changes its rates. There are differences in our brain activity. We sweat. Sometimes our digestion slows down. So when we're feeling an emotion, a lot of things are happening at the same time, and it can be really intense. So all of this kind of leads us to our definition of emotion. Emotions are responses to how we understand situations that often include changes in how we feel, what we do, and what's happening inside our bodies, including our brain.
Wow. So emotions actually, it's not only on the inside or what's going on in your head or you're feeling sad or angry. It actually um shown through our bodies too. So I think that's one point that makes emotions very interesting. So, and actually, why do we need to like learn about our emotions? Because I think um many people think that emotion is very hard to understand, but what we're trying to do here is trying to explain like the hard stuff and the scientifics behind it.
Right?
Wow. So, what makes emotion interesting? So why do we need to learn about them?
So a part of what makes our emotions interesting is just that they're such an important part of the human experience. Emotions are this universal thing. People in every time, every place, every culture experience emotions. If there are people somewhere, they're probably feeling things from time to time. And our emotions are actually surprisingly helpful. They can tell us if we enjoyed something. They can help us make decisions about the future. If we're trying to decide, let's say, between two vacations or who we should date, we can imagine what it would feel like to be in that situation. And perhaps most importantly, emotions guide us during everyday situations. A good way to think about this is with fear as an example. So we feel afraid when things are dangerous, right? We feel afraid of bears, of poisonous snakes, of people with weapons. And the things that we do when we're scared are all helpful in situations that are potentially threatening. So, for example, our eyes get kind of bigger, and that helps us see better. We become more aware of other threats, so we know if we're in more danger. Our muscles kind of tense up, so we're ready to fight or to get away. And our digestive process actually slows down, so we get more energy, so we can think quickly and we can move fast when we need to. And all of this almost seems like it's designed, right, for us to get out of danger. And you can make the same sort of case for a lot of other emotions. So something like sadness. When we're upset, a lot of people will cry or frown, which is a very visible cue that you're suffering and brings people that care about you closer to you. And people also have this deep motivation when they're upset to reconnect with others. Unless, of course, right, we're kind of overwhelmed and we don't know what to do. And then we might take some time alone in order to kind of make sense of things. So going beyond there, our emotions make our lives interesting. They give them color. They make them meaningful. Because emotions are so important to how we experience our lives, they're some of the first things that we talk about when we're having a conversation. Right? In English, after saying hello, the next thing you typically ask is, how are you? In Thai, you say sabai di mai. That's all asking about the same thing, right? It's how is the person feeling? We're fascinated by other people's emotions, and we also want them to understand ours. And our emotions are also this defining characteristic of the stories we enjoy. We enjoy stories through movies, through books, through television shows, through video games. Stories are actually the way that we understand everything. And if you take the emotions out of a story, there isn't much of a story left, right? It's just this list of things that happens. One of the kind of unfortunate things about emotion, right, is that social media companies have kind of been figuring out lately how to take advantage of emotional content to keep us looking. So they go out of their way to make us angry and upset and amused all the time. And that's not a very natural or healthy situation. So there are good and there are bad things about the emotions that we experience.
Uh, for me, when you explain this, it's kind of like when we add emotions, it's like we're writing a paragraph. But if we cut out emotion, it's like left with only the bullet points, right? So
Yeah.
for me, comparing that's what you explained. So I think stories and what affects our emotion is what makes us kind of like relatable to each other. So can you tell us, yes, can you tell us about your emotion research?
So that's actually a great segue to talk about my research because my research is exactly about how we relate to each other through emotion. So
Wow.
in my research, I take this kind of functional approach to emotion. So I'm not so much interested in specific emotions like sadness or happiness, but what do we do with our emotions? So just a minute ago, we talked about how emotions are our responses to situations. And how we understand any particular situations, right, is shaped by this lifetime of experiences, right? Time we spend with our friends, with our parents, doing homework, eating, everything else. And the emotion we feel in any given situation depends on that lifetime of experiences. So you can imagine a situation like someone winning an election, right? Some people will be very happy about it, and some people will be deeply upset. And the reason why people feel differently is because they have a variety of different beliefs, different political preferences, different expectations. They grew up in different ways that shape their views about the world. And it's not just about big things like elections, it's also these little everyday experiences. We watch movies, right? Some people will enjoy them, some people don't. Someone tells a joke, one person finds it funny, someone else is disgusted or just doesn't understand what's so funny about it. And what's interesting is that when people are responding to these things, it tells us something about them. It gives us this really brief window into how they understand their world, how they understand what happens to them. So, for example, let's say someone tells a very dirty, kind of disgusting joke, and someone else feels really, really uncomfortable with it. That tells us something about that person, right? It tells us about things that make them uncomfortable and what kind of upbringing they may have had. So my research about shared emotions looks at the effects of having the same emotion or a different emotion as another person in a particular situation. So to put that in a much, much easier way, something happens and either we feel the same way as another person or maybe we don't. When we feel the same way about something, we've both arrived at the same place, meaning the same understanding of something, despite having this entire life of different experiences. So what that means is that when we have one shared emotion with someone, we're seeing the world the same way at this very moment. But if we have many different shared emotional experiences over this long period of time, it suggests that we might get along really well. Maybe we can be friends. On the other hand, if we keep feeling differently about things, we're seeing the world very differently. Maybe we're not so compatible, and maybe we should not be spending time together. So in the lab, what we've done is we've created a variety of situations where participants share these emotions. But we started with these emotions that we would not necessarily expect people to feel closer to each other after having. So emotions like disgust and anxiety and embarrassment. And even when people feel these kind of unpleasant emotions together, they feel more connected to each other. And when they don't feel the same way about the situation, they feel more distant from each other. So would you like to hear a little bit more about one of my studies?
Sure, it's very interesting.
Glad. So let's see if I can share this. There we go. So this is appearing on the screen right now.
Yes.
All right, perfect. So in this study, what we wanted to know is if shared emotions require a common cause. So in most cases, when people feel the same way about something, it's because some kind of situation made them feel something, right? We watched the same movie, we heard the same joke. But what happens if two people feel the same way, but for completely different reasons? So one person, let's say, might be feeling a little bit stressed because they're speaking in front of other people. And meanwhile, another person who's watching this presentation might feel a little bit stressed because they have an exam coming up or a class that they're worried about. So if we're both, let's say, stressed or anxious, does that connect us, even though it's for completely different reasons? And in addition to asking that question, we also wanted this kind of strong test of the idea that shared emotions connect people, whereas unshared emotions make us more distant. And so we started with this unpleasant emotion that a lot of times makes people uncomfortable around each other, specifically anxiety. So here we have 181 people participating in the study, and we threaten all of them with electric shock. So the way we do this is there's basically this timer, and the timer counts down from 20 seconds, right? So it's 20, 19, 18, 17, and so on. And when the timer hits 0, there is a 20% chance that the person will receive electric shock. And the shock is not dangerous, but it does hurt, and most people don't like it. So as this person is worried about getting shocked, they're watching a video of another person. And sometimes this other person will also be worried about getting electric shock. But other times, this person will be frantically typing because they're getting ready to give a speech in front of strangers. And public speaking is also something that, like electric shock, right? It might make us feel kind of nervous and anxious. Or some people might just feel perfectly comfortable and not particularly worried about it. So now we want to know how the person in the study felt. So we asked them if they felt more anxious or if they felt just pretty relaxed and calm the whole time. And believe it or not, some people are threatened by shock and they just don't really care. They're completely cool the whole time. Then they see a video of the other person who then tells them how they felt. When we want them to feel the same emotion, the other person in the video says that they felt the same emotion as the participant. So if the person says, I was anxious when I was worried about getting shocked, the other person says, I was anxious about public speaking, or I was also anxious about the shock. And if the participant felt calm, the other person feels calm. But in the unshared emotion condition, whatever the participant says they felt, let's say anxious, the other person says they felt the opposite way. And after they've either felt the same emotion or a different emotion, the participant evaluates the person in the video. So they tell us how they feel about them. Do you feel close to the person in the video? Do you feel like you would have a lot in common? Would you want to spend time with this person in the future? Do you feel distant from him or her? Would you avoid this person? So what happened in the study? So here what we did is we basically averaged together all the questions asking about how close the person felt to the person in the video. And when the person in the video was threatened with electric shock, like the person in the study, a shared emotion made them feel more connected to each other, while an unshared emotion made them feel more distant, right? So less connected in this case. So what happens though when the person's threatened with electric shock, but the person in the video is stressed about something completely different, right? They're going to give a speech in front of strangers. It turns out that it's almost the same thing. People feel more connected to a person who felt the same way, even if it's for a completely unrelated reason. And they feel less connected to the person if they did not share an emotion. So let's say the person felt anxious and the other person felt completely calm. We also averaged together different questions that were asking about negative things. So would you avoid the other person? Do you feel distant from them? And you feel like you're very different from them? And here again, when both people are threatened with electric shock, the participant feels like they want to avoid the other person when they don't share an emotion. And they feel less like they want to avoid the person when they do share an emotion. And oddly enough, it doesn't really matter why this happens. So again, we find that the situation doesn't matter. You want to avoid a person more after an unshared emotion, even if that person didn't share your emotion after doing something kind of different. So let's look at some of our more general findings. So what did we learn from doing a whole bunch of studies like this? We've learned that people feel more similar, closer, and more inclined to interact with people after sharing an emotion. We've learned that this generalizes across many emotions. So it works for anxiety, it works for embarrassment, works for disgust, works for other emotions. And this is actually kind of a special finding because before we ran our studies, people were showing that very specific feelings can make people feel closer to each other. So things like pain or things like being in awe. But it turns out that it doesn't really matter what emotion we feel with another person as long as we feel the same way. And it turns out that shared emotions connect people under a variety of circumstances. So if you don't see or hear another person, you would still feel closer to them if you know they felt the same way, let's say in a text message or something. If we can't really tell what's going on with another person, there's a lot of noise, but we can kind of make out they felt the same way, we still feel closer to them. We also feel closer to people if we give people little time to decide how they feel about the other person. So they have to just keep reacting really, really fast. So apparently the effect of shared emotions connecting people doesn't really require a lot of time or thinking. And as we just saw, shared emotions still connect people when people feel the same way for very different reasons.
Wow. I think that's a very that's the example that gives us like to get the whole idea of your research.
Glad.
Super cool. So for more um so we would like to make it like simpler. Can you give us like an example of some everyday applications for your research?
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to. So one of the really amazing things about this research is that it seems to happen so reliably. So there are actually a variety of uses for that because of this. So for example, let's say we share an emotion with someone we really don't like, right? It turns out that this person really, really believes in things that make us extremely uncomfortable. It turns out that when you have a shared emotional experience with that person, we dislike them just a little bit less. And what this tells us is that just spending time around people and having the same experiences as them can slowly bring people closer to each other and help us build this connection with them, even if we previously didn't get along or didn't know them. And so this provides evidence that it's really helpful just to spend time around people and to have a lot of interpersonal contact to create these opportunities for shared experiences, or maybe just to have conversations about things that made us feel things. And once you've had this connection through shared emotions, you can also build a deeper connection on top of that and actually start working together on projects or having more intimate conversations, right? Shared emotions is kind of this easy, simple way to start a connection that can later on become much deeper. Another
Mm.
interesting thing that I've thought about is that today we have this increasing amount of interactions through technology. We talk to people with social media like Facebook. We have instant messages with people through things like Line. And some very smart people have argued that the reason why people these days are so lonely and why depression is becoming more common is because we're not communicating in person enough anymore. But in my research, shared emotions still work, even when we can't see or hear people. And what this tells me is that people can still have meaningful interactions through things like Facebook Messenger or a Line message, as long as we're willing to have an intimate conversation, to talk openly about our emotions and what we're going through, we can still connect with people.
Mm. So we have some question from the audiences. The question is, I am a mom and wondering when I got angry on my boy, should I hide it because it will make everyone uncomfortable and teach the boy the things that he did wrong? Or should I express it and show how much anger should I show if we care about the relationships?
So this is a great question. So one of the big conclusions over many, many years of research is that the best way to handle emotions generally is to kind of hear them without listening to them. So what I mean is that it's very good to be aware of our emotions, to know what's bothering us about a situation and where our boundaries are, what is happening to us. But it's not healthy to kind of just let the emotions straight out. In this case, to express anger in kind of a raw form by raising our voice or by making threats or doing things like that. And so that actually applies to a wide variety of emotions. So for example, let's say someone is upset during a movie, right? It's very sad and they start crying. When you cry, you're not letting the emotions out. You're not making them go away and fixing the situation. You actually feel more upset. And when you express anger, it generally causes people to reciprocate with anger or otherwise to feel scared. And what that does is it usually creates tension in relationships. So in relationships that are different from other child, like let's say two people who are dating, when people get angry at each other and just kind of express that, it tends to over time lead to problems in the relationship. And so the alternative, right, is that instead of just letting the anger out and kind of expressing your anger, you can talk to someone about the fact that you are feeling angry and about why you're feeling angry. And what you do when you tell them about what makes you angry is you're telling them about your boundaries and about the things that they're doing that are making you upset or uncomfortable, or that are just making you feel like they're behaving in a way that's unreasonable or unfair. And so you're giving them an opportunity to kind of adapt to your behavior, to change in a positive way that allows you to connect with each other without necessarily creating this tension in the situation. So you're hearing what the emotions are saying, right? Something is bothering me without listening to what they're telling you to do, namely yelling and getting angry.
So like when you feel something, let it sink in before delivering your you can discuss about what you're feeling, but I think it's important to like not let it out in a completely raw form, like you said.
Exactly. And a lot of times it can help, right, to give ourselves a little bit of space, like you said, just to kind of let the emotions sink in and come to a better understanding of what it is we're going through before we relate it to others. Of course, sometimes that's not possible because we're kind of right there and the other person's already there making us feel something. So some
That's very
situations are
true.
more conducive than others.
Okay, we have another question from the audience. I heard that fear is the feeling that can be spread to others people. What about anxiety and pain? Can it be the same? Can it all like spread to other persons? And what kind of situation of that feeling that can be spread?
So different emotions, all emotions are contagious in that sort of way, but different emotions are contagious for different reasons. And this contagion kind of happens at several levels. By the way, when I'm saying contagious, I mean it spreads, right? So at the most, kind of simple, sort of low level way, when people create emotional facial expressions, right? They smile, they frown, they do things with their face. Our muscles start responding in the same way, even if we're not expressing the same emotion. So we have this tendency to kind of do what they're doing And when we express emotions, we tend to also feel them. So we're basically kind of giving ourselves the same feeling that they have. But beyond that, there's also the meaning of the emotion. So emotions also spread in kind of a deeper, more cognitive kind of way. So with fear in particular, for example, we feel afraid when there's a threat to our lives and we're in danger. And so when someone else is afraid, it's telling us that there's a source of danger somewhere. And that means that we might be in danger too. And so it's very, very natural when people are scared for other people to get scared because chances are they should be looking out there and worrying. As for something like anxiety, right? Anxiety suggests like a more distal kind of threat, right? Something is happening in the future that could potentially cause us to worry. And so with anxiety, right, when people are uncomfortable and they're anxious, right, we might empathize with them. We might feel like, in their situation, we would also feel anxious and we might sympathize with them, right? We might feel bad for them, but it doesn't necessarily spread in the way that fear does because it doesn't tell us that there's something right now that we should be concerned about. Anxiety tends to tell us something more personal about what a person's struggling with. It's further down the road. It's not right now in the same sort of way. And pain is kind of similar in that sort of way, that when we are in pain, right? Unless whatever hurt us is something that could hurt the other person, and that's like a fire spreading through the environment, we're not necessarily susceptible to the same kind of pain. So if it's someone we're close to, we're particularly likely to feel like pain for them. And a lot of times similar areas of our brain will activate, we'll kind of maybe even feel a little bit of pain because they're feeling pain, but it doesn't spread in the same way that fear might, where there's something in the environment that we should be aware of.
Hmm. So emotions is basically like a story, and it's contagious. It makes us aware of the situation and brings us together. So that's the importance of emotions and what makes it interesting. So Ashley, we're running out of time. So I would like to thank you so much, Ajanadi, for helping us to understand our feelings better. And that will be all for today. And thank you everyone for watching us, and please subscribe and join our next episode at the end of next month. We in social psychology are very happy to publicize useful knowledge in social psychology and what can we use psychology in everyday life. So see you next week. Thank you so much อาจารย์อดีค่ะ and สวัสดีค่ะ
Thank you for having
everyone.
me.
Thank you.
Be here.